All right. Hey, welcome again to another Bible study with Douglas. We are going through Exodus 32. And you know what's so amazing about this passage is we're going to see the amazing grace of our God. So often we hear this notion that grace is something, it's kind of a New Testament thing, or people say that there was grace in the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible, but really, we kind of focus on the New Testament when it comes to the concept of grace. I believe this comes out of the teaching of dispensationalism that distinctly calls the law of the dispensation of law versus the dispensation of grace. And in my humble opinion, that is okay. Sorry about that. We are back. We seem to be having some internet difficulties because of the bandwidth, and who knows? I have good internet, but sometimes it doesn't always work. Even in a first world country, it doesn't always work. That's just how it goes. All right. Well, we were back there in Exodus chapter 32, and we were looking at how God is gracious to Israel. We're talking about the feasts of the Lord. Understanding the feasts of the Lord is imperative if you want to get a superstructure for the Bible. Without those, you're going to be kind of lost. But if you get those, things are going to start to lock into place, kind of like Legos. They're just going to start interlocking, and suddenly you'll be building this amazing structure and be like, wow, it's all starting to make sense. Without having those feasts as your time markers, you're going to miss a lot of things. You may say, well, those are for the ancient Jews, right? A lot of people want to say that. But the reality is God gave the feasts to Israel, and because we, who are Gentiles, have now become part of the Commonwealth of Israel, those have great significance for us, and I would argue that we should be keeping them, okay? You may not have that conviction yet. Maybe you'll never get that conviction, but just try it. These are things that God created, not man. It wasn't the Jews that came up with these feasts. They're not Jewish feasts. I've heard a lot of people call them Jewish feasts. In fact, I know a good Messianic rabbi who calls them Jewish feasts, and every time he says it, it's like fingers on the chalkboard, because they're not Jewish feasts. They're God's feasts. That's what God calls them. He says they're my feasts. So anyway, when we understand those feasts, so God took Israel out on that day called Passover, and then immediately after that, we have the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and then 3 days after Passover, we have the Feast of First Fruits, and then 49 days or 50 days after Passover, we come to the base of the mountain when God gives the Ten Commandments, and that is known as Shavuot, or the Feast of Weeks. We know it as Pentecost. So you put all these things together, and now we're at Pentecost. And if you see what happened in the first time, then when it repeats in the New Testament, these things start to make sense, and you begin to understand why it is a renewed covenant. But if we don't understand the feast, we're going to miss so much of this beautiful imagery and significance that we have in the New Covenant, which is contained in the New Testament. So that is very, very important for us to understand. So they're at the base of Mount Sinai. We remember back in chapter 19, which is not very long ago. All right, Moses has been up there for about 40 days now. God has been giving him these instructions. Remember that everybody heard God's voice in chapter 20. He gave the 10 commandments, the 10 words, and everybody heard those. And then he continued to speak, and everybody heard what God was saying until he got to chapter 24, and they said, all that Yehovah has said, we will do. So they all heard the words, they all agreed to them, they were sealed by blood, and that is when Israel became God's wife. Okay, Israel became God's wife. And if you don't get the wife motif, a lot of things are going to become fuzzy as well, because right away God starts to call her an adulterous wife. To be an adulterous wife precludes this idea that they got married. Okay, if they didn't get married, then she's hardly being an adulterous wife. But if they did get married, and now the wife is off with some other guy, then she's being an adulterer. So that's what we have to see here. And right away, we see that the flesh takes over. I can only imagine what was happening in the spiritual realm. Satan's kind of encouraging them. But we can't just pin the tail on Satan, as it were. Satan is merely an agent who says, hey, check that out. Or, why don't you try that? Or, I double dog dare you to try this. Okay, that's what Satan does. You cannot stand before God on Judgment Day and say, Satan made me do it. Satan will be like, that is patently false. I did not make you do it. I simply posed a question. Okay, I said, did God really say? And you happen to fall for it. Is that my fault? Okay, so we cannot blame Satan. We can understand his role in it, and we can understand that, yeah, he is a devil, right? But he doesn't make you do things. He doesn't make you sin, and he's not responsible for the sin of Israel. Really what's happening is God has taken them out of Egypt, but he hasn't taken Egypt out of them. Well, why not? Why doesn't God just do that? Because that's not how God operates. God has made us in such a way that we are free will agents. We have the right and authority and capacity to choose our own destiny. And I'll have to be honest with you sometimes. Sometimes I wish that I was a Calvinist, because then I'd say, you know what, it doesn't really matter because it's all predestined. Whatever's happening in my life, it's just because God dictated it has to be this way. But the reality is it's not that way. Okay, I know God has his big umbrella plan of the ages, and he's going to accomplish that, whether I go along with it or not. But on the micro level, on my life level, on your life level, you and I have choices that we have to make daily. And those choices are going to determine where we end up. And that's kind of scary, because you start looking at your life, you're like, well, I guess I'm doing okay, or I'm not doing so okay, or I thought I was on track, but now I'm not on track. Okay, now please listen to me. I'm not saying that where we are, our circumstance is the sum total of all your choices, because that's not true, right? But your choices will influence your circumstances. They don't always create your circumstances, but neither do your circumstances completely create you. All right, it's both of them together. All right, so I might have started off in a very difficult place in life, with not having anything, any kind of advantage in life, but through hard work, through belief and trust and following after the Lord, I can achieve or receive great blessings from God's hand. That may involve financial blessing. It might not. That may involve some kind of, let's call it spiritual blessing, just to be incredibly vague at this point. But my point here is that we have to make a choice. And it's so much easier to see it when you make bad choices. Okay. I hope nobody would say that, the guy who's in prison for murder, it had nothing to do with him. I'm like, well, that's not true. Okay. I have no doubt that, it's possible that this man or woman might have had a difficult upbringing, and maybe they didn't learn how to deal with anger, or maybe they didn't know how to learn to deal with their frustration and their jealousy. And so it turned into eventually murder. Okay. I understand that there's a circumstance that will foster that kind of activity, but there's also personal choice that leads to it. So it's both together. That's all I'm trying to say. And in relation to Israel, what we see is that Israel, having been in Egypt for 400 years, still has that deep down in their hearts. And unfortunately, they're never going to be able to shake this Egypt, this heart of Egypt that they have, because it's going to keep coming back again and again and again. They're showing no trust in God. They're showing no faith in Moses, and they're simply saying, you know what? This whole new God thing isn't really working out for us. We're going to go back to what we're used to. And that's because we are creatures of habit, right? And as the proverb said, the dog returns to his own vomit, right? I mean, it's disgusting. And yet that is what we do, all right? And this is why you hear so many times of, a woman who's in an abusive relationship and she goes back to that relationship. You're like, what are you doing? Are you crazy? The guy is beating you, etc. Why are you going back to that? It's because so often we go back to that which is familiar. It may not be comfortable, it may not be fun, but we know it. It's part of our identity, all right? And this is why it's important that we cut out the sin and the lawlessness from our lives. Because if we allow that lawlessness to become part of our lives, it becomes part of our identity. And it's going to be that much harder to go back to. Really, we've become these creatures of habit. And so Israel is now falling into that unfortunate sin, is that they are falling back into what is familiar, what is easy, what they have seen probably since they were, little boys and girls, that they saw in the land of Egypt. They saw how the Egyptians worshiped their gods, and so now they're going to do the same thing. And rather than saying, we heard the voice of God, we saw the lightning, we saw the fire, and we heard the thunder, and we heard him speak to us, and we saw all the things that he did in Egypt, And we have seen, even as it is to this moment, the pillar of fire and the cloud, all these things that we are eyewitnesses to, rather than going back and looking at that list of accomplishments that God has done, they're quick to say, well, it's over. Now, what I love to do in these situations is to show us how it's not just Israel. Israel is simply a people under the microscope for the rest of us to examine. You know why? Because they are us. We are the same. And the way they act is the way that we act. We're exactly the same. We are exactly the same. Because what happens is we find ourselves in a tight spot, and rather than say, okay, I'm going to go back and I'm going to review what God has done. I'm going to review God's track record. I'm going to go back and think about all the wonderful things that he's done and how he's never, ever failed. And I've never seen someone who loves the Lord begging bread. Okay? If you go back and you examine what he's done, then you come up to your current trial and you say, well, I don't know how he's going to do this, but he's going to. So instead of doing that, we kind of default back to this position of, well, it's over, so I better look for a different God. Okay, now few of us are gonna break out the earrings, melt them down, and make some golden calf, this Apis bull. It's very unlikely. That's not what we do. But rather than looking to God for our supply, looking to God to meet our needs, instead of looking to God to be our strong fortress and God to fight the battles for us, we're quick to find a different God who can give us what we need, give us what we want. And God has promised to give us what we need. And sometimes, quite often, what we want as well. He's not this God, this Father who's like, well, you're only getting, just green beans and that's it, because you don't need any of this other stuff. No, he loves to give you a cookie too. All right. He really is an amazingly good and faithful and joyful God who delights in giving good things to his children. Doesn't Jesus say as much, right? If you, being evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him? God delights in giving good gifts. And I want you to understand that God has not changed. His character has not changed one iota from back here in the wilderness up until today. Nothing changed in his character at the cross. He's the same God that he was way back when and that he is today. There was no, pre-cross God and post-cross God. None of that stuff. He's the same. He's exactly the same. His grace is just the same. All right? And what we're seeing here in this chapter is just a phenomenal example of how gracious God is. Because God and Israel have just gotten married. They're on their honeymoon, as it were. I mean, it's almost like God is still signing docs. He's like, yes, I do. Okay, I do. All right. And they're still signing the contract, right? Like she signed her name. Okay, all right. And he's off signing, yes, I take her to be my wife. And the next thing he knows, she's off already, with the best man. And God's like, whoa, like, wow, what's going on here? What's wrong? What's up with my wife? All right. That's what it's like. So we have to see how patient and kind God is. I mean, think how you would feel. Put yourself in God's shoes for a second and imagine that your wife or possibly your husband has run off on you and he's already cheating on you. How would you feel about that? You'd be quite devastated. You'd be hurt. Then your hurt would turn to anger because you'd say, wait a second. What? I just promised myself to you, and what are you doing? You'd want to rip off your ring, throw it to the ground, and say, I'll have nothing to do with you, right? And yet God is so patient with Israel. That is what's so amazing. So I just love witnessing the grace of God. And I want to demonstrate to everybody that God is gracious here in the Hebrew Bible. In fact, when we get to chapter 34, he's going to declare who he is. He says, Yehovah, Yehovah, the God who is gracious and merciful, who is long-suffering and patient. And that is who God is. He loves mercy and kindness, and he wants to give good things to those who trust him. All right, so Aaron says, okay, give me your earrings, etc. And they bring them to Aaron, and he puts them into this they melts the gold, and he fashions it. And now he says, this is your God, O Israel, that brought you out of the land of Egypt. Now, in the Hebrew, it actually says, these are your gods. Okay, these are your gods. So that is interesting. It's very much in the plural. He's not just saying this statue is your God, but these are your gods. Now, this was probably the Apis bull. The Apis bull was one of the most sacred icons that the ancient Egyptians had. He was to be worshipped, obviously. And the reference to two, these are your gods, may in fact be a reference to an associate god. That's one possibility. Another theory is that there could be a textual variant here. And it's, instead of saying, these are your gods, it's saying, now this is your God in the place of the true Elohim, but this is now your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. So, the Hebrew, as far as I can tell, is quite clear, unless, of course, there is a variant that it should be, this is your God. But what the Hebrew actually says is, these are your gods. These are your gods. So it may be, with that reading that I'm seeing in the Hebrew, not the English, but in the Hebrew, these are your gods that brought you out of the land of Egypt. If it's this bull, this little calf that he's made, there could be some kind of associate. Who would that associate be? Well, who is the God that took Israel out of Egypt? It's Yehovah. Okay? So what I think we're seeing here is an early stage of syncretism. Now, syncretism means that you don't burn the bridge with the one God, you just add another God. Okay? So instead of saying, I'm done with you, God A, I'm going to God B, you don't do that. You say, you know what, God A, I like you, you're okay. But you don't always come through in every situation. So I'm going to have you, and I'm going to have God B, and I'm going to syncretize these. All right. So I think the latter is the more likely scenario, that they're not giving up on Yehovah. They're not saying, oh, he's a false God. I mean, how could they say that? They all heard. They all know what happened. But they're looking for some kind of a physical representation. They're looking for a God that they're familiar with. And so now they're adding, it's now Yehovah plus the golden calf. You see that? It's Yehovah plus. And that is syncretism. It's the true God plus these other gods. It's not forget the true God. Let's just go with these false gods. No. It's always, yes, the true God. Yes, of course we believe in him. But we also believe in these other gods. And that is how it was for the next 700 years for northern Israel and the next 900 years for southern Israel. They never said, we're done with Yehovah, forget him. They're always like, we worship you, we believe in you. And they did. They always worshiped him. You know who one of the first kings, I think the first king to practice syncretism was none other than Solomon. It says that Solomon, because of his 900 wives and concubines, okay, that's a sign there, guys. It's just one, okay. It's not the women's fault, right? I mean, they're just bringing their customs, and Solomon was marrying all these international ladies, basically, and they brought their local gods with them. And you happy wife, happy life. If you've been married, you know that saying, right? Happy wife, happy life. So Solomon was like, okay, sweetheart, okay, that's fine, no worries, sure. We can bring your God in, that's fine. You can bring in Molech and Chemosh, that's fine. And we can still worship Yehovah. Excuse me. So it's not either or. It can be both and. But the problem is that it can't be. It cannot be both and. And that was the first thing that God said. He said, look, I'm the one who brought you out of Egypt. I am the one who brought you out. You shall have no other gods before me. Okay, none. Right? And then he tells them to not make any image of any likeness of anything that's in heaven or on earth. Right? And what they're doing is they're saying, okay, fine. We have you as our God, but we're going to have this other God too. Now, do we do this in our day? Oh, yeah. You had better believe it, right? I mean, everybody I know, in churches, okay, and I include myself in this number, is like, of course I believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Of course I believe in the God of the Bible. Of course I believe in Jesus, right? And I do. I absolutely do. And I think everybody that I meet really believes in him. They really love him. But what happens is all of us, we have the true God, and then we add these other gods, okay? And then these other gods can have lots of different forms and shapes and kind of depending on your fancy. So you have, yes, the one true God, but then you have your local, familiar household God, okay? And that is what got Israel in trouble because, yeah, they were still worshiping Yehovah, but in the temple, they were also weeping for Tammuz. They were making cakes for his mother, and the men were worshiping and bowing down to the sun. Okay, they never denied Yehovah, but they just added all these other things, and that is what we do in our day. We say, "Well, I'm sure God's okay if I do this. I'm sure God won't mind. This little thing that I'm doing." We rationalize it. We bring in these other gods that are competing with what God has told us. Think of it this way. Let's say that you get married and you're like, I'm sure my wife won't mind if I just get another wife. I'm not getting rid of her, right? I still got her. I love her. She gets to sleep in the master bedroom. She gets everything first class. She's number one, but I got this other wife too. And I'm sure she won't mind, if I just kind of bring her in the house and then I got two wives, right? Well, your wife does mind, okay? If you're a woman, your husband does mind if you have somebody on the side, right? That's called adultery. But, and that's what's happening. That's exactly what's happening. And it happens in our day, and it happened in their day. So they didn't get rid of God. They didn't get rid of Yehovah. They just added to him. Verse 5, so when Aaron saw it, he built an altar before it, and Aaron made a proclamation, said, tomorrow is a feast to Yehovah. So you have this golden calf, right? So here it is. And then he makes an altar before it, that's not a pedestal, all right? You've got this golden calf right here, this golden calf, and then before it, spatially, there's an altar. Okay, there's an altar there. And you're going to bring your sacrifices to the altar in honor of this false god right over here. And notice what he says. He made a proclamation. Tomorrow is a feast to who? Yehovah. Hey, what do you know? This is great. You see this syncretism? It's now okay. Yeah, we're not getting rid of Yehovah. We're going to celebrate him. We're going to celebrate him and honor him with this thing, okay, which he never asked for, which he does not like. He commanded against it, and they're like, no, we're doing this for him. Now, if you're starting to think maybe of some holidays, I'm not going to say it, but I do have to wonder why we eat pork on Easter. Sort of a question there. I mean, first of all, the name Easter bothers me. It comes from Ishtar, okay? From Ishtar, okay? Astarte, right? That's obviously pagan. And then eating pork on this day we're celebrating the resurrection of Jesus. somehow doesn't fit with me well either. Can't imagine Jesus like, okay, break out the pork. I just rose. You get a pork now. Yes. All right. Yes. All right. Somehow it just doesn't feel right. Okay. Never mind the many verses that say it's not right, but just in my gut, it just doesn't quite seem right. Okay. So tomorrow's a feast to Yehovah. What they're doing is they're saying, look, this is for his honor, but he doesn't want it. He detests it. So just kind of do a little fact checking. Okay. Have we created any holidays in honor of God that he never asked for and he probably doesn't want? Okay, so I'll let you think about that. All right, I don't need to spell it out for you, but you think about it. Let the Holy Spirit just work in your heart. Okay, because I honestly don't know the answer. Okay, I don't know the answer. I have an idea, but I don't have all the answers, that's for sure. All right, so think about that. But notice here that they were doing it for his honor, and yet when he tells Moses, he's like, hey, he says right here in verse 7, I'll get there. So then they rose early the next day, offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings, and the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. And Yehovah said to Moses, go down, for your people whom you brought out of the land of Egypt have corrupted themselves. Now I find this kind of it's almost like it's kind of a little bit of humor in the Bible. Okay, so it's like him, he and Moses are, because later Moses says, well, the people that you brought out, okay, and in verse 11, Moses pleaded with Yehovah as God and said, Yehovah, why does your wrath burn hot against your people whom you brought out of the land of Egypt? All right. It's just kind of, obviously Moses is in this sort of compromised position, right? He's pleading on their behalf. And yet, in hindsight, I find it just slightly humorous. God's like, well, the people that you brought out, and God's like, or Moses is like, no, the people that you brought out, right? It's almost like when children are misbehaving, and we say, to your wife, you say, well, your children are misbehaving. And then she says, no, your children are misbehaving, right? That's kind of this little scenario here, right? Of where neither of them wants to claim this people right now. They're like, they're not my people. Don't give them to me, right? And God's like, your people, Moses. And Moses is like, no, don't you pass it off on me. No. They're your people, okay? Let's just make that clear. Your people, all right? So you almost have to wonder if God didn't chuckle in the background. He's like, that was actually kind of funny, even though I'm really mad at them right now. But maybe he saved that for later. And he's like, that was kind of a good one, Moses. Who knows, right? But so but it's interesting here. Why would God say, your people have done this? Okay. And he goes on in verse 8, they have turned aside quickly out of the way which I commanded them, that they have made themselves a molded calf and worshipped it and sacrificed to it and said, this is your God, O Israel. This is your God, O Israel, that brought you out of the land of Egypt. All right, so they say that again, and they say it again, that the God that brought you, so the verb there is still in the plural, so it is, and again, suggesting something that may not be abundantly clear, but I would suggest that it involves this idea of syncretism. Okay, and Yehovah said to Moses, I have seen this people, and indeed it is a stiff-necked people. Now therefore let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them, and I'll make of you a great nation. Now, when he says that my wrath will burn hot against them and I'll consume them, he literally means that. Okay, they could have been cremated right then and there. Remember, God is a consuming fire. Our God is a consuming fire. So his power, it's fire. There's no other way to say it. It's fire, and that fire gets out, and it starts to destroy people. It starts to just incinerate them, quite literally. And, you know, if he had done that, he would have been just in doing that. He would have been very just, because, you know what, they signed this covenant, they got married, you know, right away. She breaks, you know, covenant number 1, number 2, okay, number 3, you know, for sure. Maybe not number 4, but there's certainly the first 3, all right, on that side of loving Yehovah, their God, with all of their heart, mind, and soul. And they break it right away. And God would have been absolutely just to destroy them right then and there. But what do we see God do? He doesn't do it. There's an intercessor who's kind of holding him back. Now, I don't want you to think that, oh, God is such a wrathful God, and if he were really a nice God, he wouldn't have acted that way. But again, put yourself in God's shoes. How would you feel if you had just gotten married and your husband or your wife is already going after and sleeping with another god? Okay, it wasn't just that it was a wayward glance. Okay, I mean, this is, you know, they're going for it, and they did it, right? They just fornicated. They committed adultery with this other god. That's exactly what they did. I mean, you'd be like, I'm divorcing you. We just got married and you did that. It's over. This marriage is over, okay? I'm not going any further. So when you take a step back and you see it, not as God just being this big, mean judge and, you know, he just can't contain himself and he's always trying to kill people. No, God is incredibly patient. And he really does hold himself back when I would have been like, yeah, just smoke them, you know, just get rid of them. Like, they don't deserve anything from you. He's incredibly patient. He's so patient. Verse 11, then Moses pleaded with Yehovah his God and said, Yehovah, why does your wrath burn hot against your people whom you have brought out of the land of Egypt with great power and with a great mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians speak and say, he brought them out to harm them, to kill them in the mountains and to consume them from the face of the earth? Turn from your fierce wrath and relent from this harm to your people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Israel, your servants, to whom you swore by your own self, and said to them, I will multiply your descendants as the stars of heaven, and all this land that I have spoken of I will give to your descendants, and they shall inherit it forever. So he's reminding God. Remember, God doesn't need to be reminded. He has not forgotten. He's not forgotten at all. But I want you to know that God can be swayed. Okay, God can be swayed. And I just have to think about my little daughter who can sway me. We're in the grocery store and she says, "Oh, please, 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 can we get ice cream?" And I'm like, "No." And she's like, "Oh, please." And I'm like, "No. Can we get some ice cream?" "Okay, fine." God can be swayed. He can be swayed. He's not this robot, this, God who just, he's like, he looks at the rule book. "I'm sorry, that's just how it is. And you broke the rules. And so you're dead." He's not like that. He can be swayed. You can persuade God. You can persuade God to act differently. Just like when God sent Jonah to Nineveh. And why didn't Jonah want to go? Because he says, "I knew that you're like this. I knew that you're a gracious and merciful God. That's why I didn't want to go, because I was afraid this was going to happen." Jonah was afraid that God would relent from harming. And I'll tell you, there's times where I'm like, you know what, that does it. I'm just so fed up with this person. I'm going to go and tell that person. And by the time I get over there and I'm like, of course I look at myself. Maybe I'm wrong, okay? But I also look at the situation. I think, well, maybe it's not that bad. Maybe we can work something out. Because in my heart, I'm not saying I'm perfect because I'm not, but in my heart, I want there to be peace. In my heart, I want the right thing, okay? And, God's like a billion times obviously better than I am. But, God is the same way. There's a sort of that initial, like, just that fiery wrath, and then it calms down very, very quickly. And I think sometimes we've painted God as this emotionless being, that he has no emotions. He's got the rule book, and it's just, he's like a robot. "I am God. I do not have any feelings." But God has feelings. He has emotions. He can be grieved. He can be angered. He can sort of be grossed out. When he talks about them taking their children and sacrificing, he's like, oh, you know what? I never asked for that, and it never even came into my mind that you would do such a thing. God's just like, ugh, right? I mean, he's also angry about it, but he's also like, ew, that's just gross. That just ain't right. That's just not right. That's just not right. All right. So, God can be persuaded. So remember that you can keep on banging on the door of heaven and say, Lord, I really need you to do something. Okay. Now, I don't know what he's going to do. He's God. He will decide. But know that the door is there to bang on, okay? And say, I know you're listening, okay? And that's why Jesus said to ask and to seek and to knock and to keep doing those.
I know you're getting my text.
Okay, and it's just like the woman with the unrighteous judge, right? Eventually, this unrighteous judge relented because she was persistent, right? And tell you, it is a mystery to me. I do not know why. I'm like, Lord, I asked you, right? You want me to grovel? I mean, what's the deal? Like, do I have to just get on my hands and knees and just beg you like a baby? Or like, what is it that you want? What do I have to do in order to sort of make you hear me? I know you can hear me, but why aren't you acting? And then I go back to the Psalms and I see that David, again and again, he's asking that same question. He's like, I've been crying all night long. My bed's wet with tears, right? Why don't you answer? Okay. And, he says, weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. And there's something that David understood, that even though we cry out and we just pour out our hearts to God and say, what are you doing, God? But somehow, and then we just kind of like, okay, all right. And you just suddenly find that peace. Doesn't mean that your problems have been resolved, or that, you got all the money you need now, or that the cancer's gone. It doesn't mean that those things have changed. It just means that suddenly there's this peace. You're like, okay, I'm going to surrender. I don't know. I just don't know. But I'm going to surrender and just trust. I'm just going to trust. And for some reason, that's where God has us. God takes us to that place, and there's something special about it. And I frankly don't understand. I don't know what it's all about. I don't know why. But I know that he's good and that he's faithful. So remember, Abraham, Isaac, and Israel are servants to whom you swore by your own self. And of course, this is in regards to Israel. So Yehovah relented from the harm that said he would do to his people. Now he could have kept his promise, but yet fulfilled it through Moses. He could have done that. And we would have said the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Moses. Okay. We'd be like, oh, okay. So, and also when you come to the New Testament, remember Ananias and Sapphira, right? I mean, they had their one chance and then it was over because they blew it. So there are times when God is incredibly gracious and he gives you another chance, and there's times where you had the chance, you had all the right information, you made the wrong choice, and then it's over. So I just love God's grace. I'm so excited about his grace. And if you're listening online right now, and maybe you join me on some of my Facebook conversations, sometimes we can get into these discussions about the law and such, and people have made the accusation that what about grace? You're abandoning grace. Oh no, I'm not. I love grace. I'm telling you, if it weren't for grace, I would have given up a long time ago. I would have said, forget it. I can never do it, and because if God isn't gracious, then forget it. I'm going to go do something else. But the more that I know that God is gracious, the more I want to press into following after his laws. Because I blow it, but I know that there's grace, then I get back up, I dust myself off, and I say, okay, let's do it again. Okay? Because the law was given for my good instructions. It wasn't there to trip me up. It's not there to entangle me. It's not there to confuse me. It's not there to just show me how much of a wretch I am. That's not the purpose of the law, at least not according to what God says, right? God says if a man does it, he'll live by it, right? He says that, oh, Israel, I gave these to you for your good and as life and blessing. And to break them is a cursing and death, right? So he gave those to us. They're good instructions to us. And me trying to keep them is not legalistic. It's just being a good citizen, okay? I mean, the law is good if used lawfully. I mean, think about it. If someone is an outstanding citizen, that means that they're not breaking the law, right? You wouldn't say, well, you're just being legalistic by not robbing the bank today. Like, what are you talking about? I mean, I'm just being a good citizen. I'm not trying to score extra points or anything. I just want to be a good citizen. I want to be good to my fellow man. I don't want any trouble. I want peace in my life. So I'm not going to break the law. Okay? If I start breaking the law, there's going to be trouble, right? And I don't want that. I just don't want that. If nothing else for me, right? Let alone for my brothers. I just want I want to have a good life. And so I'm going to follow the good laws that we have in America. Not the bad ones, but the good ones, okay? And that's the same thing. God's like, look, if you want a good life, I've given you this set of instructions. Follow these, and you'll have a good life, okay? Doesn't mean there won't be trials along the way. Doesn't mean there won't be attacks sometimes. But this set of instructions these are life instructions. This is, follow these, and you'll have a pretty good life. Break them, and you'll face the consequences, okay? So that's all it's talking about. But, should I break those? And I do. Then I say, oh, I'm so glad that God is gracious. But you see, it's very different from somebody who is presumptuous, all right? Because, it's like you're going along, and let's say you break the speed limit, for example, okay? The police goes, do you know how fast you're going? And I say, no, officer, you know what? I made a mistake. I went too fast. I did not mean to. I ask for your clemency, and he just might give it to you. Okay, but if you're going along and you see him in the car next to you, and he's going the speed limit, and you're like, forget that, and you just blow past him. When he pulls you over, do you expect him to give you any clemency? No, of course not, because you knowingly broke the law. And that's the same way with God. That's the same way that I'm with my kids. If I know they're trying to do the right thing and they mess up, then yeah, I've got lots of grace. But if I know they're trying to kind of rattle my cage and they're purposely breaking the things that I'm asking them to do, then I'm a lot more stern about that. And that's really how God is too. If you're desiring to do the right thing, but you mess up, there's grace. But if you're just rebellious, like, I don't care what you say, I don't care what your laws are, forget that, and do my own thing. And God's like, why are you provoking me to anger? And I sometimes ask my kids, I'm like, why are you doing this? You're going to make me mad if you do that, right? Don't do that, right? And if they keep doing it, I'm like, why are you doing this? You're going to make me mad if you do it. And then they do it, I'm like, So, that is how God is that he has tons of grace for those that love him, for those that keep his commandments. And it says in Proverbs, it says that if a man does not keep the law, even his prayers are an abomination to the Lord. That's in Proverbs 28. So we want to keep the Torah. We want to keep the instructions God gave us because they are for our good, they're for our life and our enjoyment. All right, so God is gracious again and again. Verse 15, and Moses turned and went down from the mountain, and the 2 tablets of the testimony were in his hand. The tablets were written on both sides, the one on Okay, and we're back. Sorry again about the internet, but we're back anyway, so we'll just move on with it. I guess that's the good news. So we're back here in Exodus 32 still. And so Aaron says in verse 23, For they said to me, make us gods that shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him. And I said to them, whoever has any gold, let them break it off. So they gave it to me, and I cast it into the fire, and this calf came out. Okay, you know, I bet you Moses is kind of like, yeah, right, brother. Yeah, I remember you growing up, and you just came up with these stories, you know. So I don't know what happened, you know. They gave me the gold, and I threw it in, and out, you know, this calf came out, right? I don't know what happened. I mean, it says very clearly that he took engraving tools and he made it, right? But you know, so Aaron is just kind of, you know, he's not exaggerating the story, but he's of course lessening the story, right? He's retelling it in his favor, right? And don't we do that? Well, he's not really embellishing. He's kind of disembellishing, you know. He's kind of like he's reducing it, in my opinion. Okay, that he's like, well, it just kind of happened, you know, and he's not saying, yeah, they gave me the gold and then I formed it and all that, and we made this gold and I set up this altar. He's just saying it just sort of happened. Now, in English, we have the passive voice, and the passive voice is really handy when you want to say that something happened without saying who did it. Okay.
That's saying you did it.
You know, it's kind of like saying, you know, like my wife saying, I'm going to make dinner in, you know, just in 25 minutes. And, you know, I get a urge to eat chips or something. And I get out the bag and the salsa, and she says, what happened here? I said, well, you know, the bag was, the bag got, you know, the bag was taken out of the cupboard, and the salsa was taken out of the fridge.
It was there on the counter.
You know, and there's situations like that where we like to use the passive voice to just say, well, something happened, right? You know, yeah, the ball was punctured, okay, or the car got a flat tire. You know, you're not necessarily the lamp got broken. Yeah, the lamp got broken, right? Or
it just went into the one in front.
Yeah, the plate got broken, right? Or well, how did it get broken? Well, it just did, right? And we always, you know, this is a very classic example of trying to lessen the guilt, right? When you're the guilty party, it's like, well, it just happened, right? But what we need to do as mature, hopefully maturing, you know, adults, is take responsibility for our actions. And it's funny that, you know, even as you get older, you still don't want to take responsibility for your actions. I mean, I know I don't, okay? I still want to blame somebody else. Now, I've already gotten over a lot of the lessons from when I was younger, and those don't bother me so much. Yeah, I'll take responsibility for that one. I'll take responsibility for that one. It doesn't bother me. But these other ones that still bother me, okay? And when I step out of myself and kind of look at my life and I say, okay, I can see that God is working in this area. He's working in that area. And those areas where I'm kind of caught in something and I don't want to take responsibility, that's because God is still working in me. And it's still very tender because it hurts, and it's still something that I'm holding on to. And what I need to do is relinquish those areas and say, okay, Lord, you got to work on me. And you know, and I do this all the time. I'm constantly just praying, like, Lord, you know, teach me. All right, you know, teach me patience and all that stuff, right? But then when I'm in the moment, I'm like, no, I don't want patience. I want it now. I want it now, all right? And Lord, teach me to trust. He's like, okay. You know, but then when he's teaching me how to trust him, I'm like, no, just give it to me now, right? So I have these kind of two parts of myself. There's one part of Doug where I can step out of my skin and I can look at my life, you know, sort of in this very metaphysical kind of way, and I say, oh yes, I can see that God is working in my life here, and I see, you know, I'm getting there, and he's working over here, right? And then I kind of suck back into my skin, and I'm like, it still hurts. I don't like it. I hate it, right? And so when I'm sort of out of myself, I say, Lord, thank you for all these wonderful lessons. I really appreciate them. By the way, when you hear me in that other state, please forgive me, okay? Because that's when I'm really upset, and I'm saying it's all your fault, okay? You know, but remember this time when I'm saying to you that I get it, I understand it. But when I'm back over here and I'm like, I hate it, right? And that's just because God is working with me, right? So again, we have the example of Israel to study because, you know, they're a microcosm, and they're a microcosm of humanity. And they show us what our humanity looks like. It just happens to be that they're under the microscope instead of my life. But if you could look at my life, you'd see very similar characteristics, right? All kinds of different choices that I have to make. Sometimes I make good choices, sometimes I make bad choices. But in those bad choices, that's where God is going to say, okay, let's work on this. Let's take this bad choice and let's deal with it. Let's grow from it. You know, it goes back to the garden. Remember Adam? So Adam, what happened? Well, it was the woman you gave me, right? Had he said, you know what? If he had just said, you know, God, I ate the fruit. I'm sorry. You're right. I ate the fruit, you know? But instead he says the woman maybe, but not just the woman you gave me. Okay? See, that's what happens. So Aaron is not taking any responsibility for himself. He's saying the people, you know how evil they are. And so then they kind of forced me, and I took their gold, and I just threw it in the fire, and this calf came out. Right? And Moses is like,
Pretty nice calf. You just fell.
I don't think so, brother. I don't think so.
You have to make a mold and you have to pour it.
Yeah. I mean, this is obviously a lot of work. It doesn't happen just in an hour, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So and this calf came up. One of the funniest verses in the Bible. All right. Verse 25. Now, when Moses saw that the people were unrestrained, for Aaron had not restrained them to their shame among their enemies, then Moses stood in the entrance of the camp, and he said, whoever is on the Lord's side, come to me. And all the sons of Levi gathered themselves together to him. Now, we saw earlier that it says that the people rose up, they ate, and they drank, and they rose up to play. Okay, what does it mean they were playing?
Orgies.
Yeah, okay. This is probably a euphemism, and also that they're unrestrained. All right, we're going to see later in the book of Numbers this guy named Phinehas, who goes and takes a spear, all right, and he runs it through a couple who are going for it. Okay, it's one of the Moabite women and an Israeli man. All right, and they're right. Not far, okay? Remember, everyone's in a tent, okay? They're not like in the suburbs or anything. They're not in some motel. They're in these tents, and it says that she was making quite a bit of noise, okay? And this fire, all the while, there's this fire breaking out in the camp, okay? Because of the plague, God's fire is breaking out among the camp. So Phinehas takes a spear, and he goes and he runs them through, okay, into the ground. That's right. And it says, then the plague subsided, okay? So he had the guts. Phinehas had the guts to stand up and to do the right thing. And you could say, well, you know, I'm sure the couple were thinking, well, you know, I'm sure God's okay with this, you know, man and woman, it's kind of how he made us, you know, and you know how we men are, and this is all natural and all this stuff. And God's like, no, it doesn't work that way. Okay, first of all, these Moabite women were sent by none other than Balaam, all right, because he knew that he couldn't actually curse you guys because I blessed you. So what he did is he told Balak to send in their young ladies who would then come and seduce you to go and worship their gods, and worshiping their gods means you have these orgies. Okay, so that gives us sort of a base point, okay, of where we can get an idea of what is happening here. They're probably having these crazy orgies, and they're unrestrained, it says, to their shame among their enemies. Okay, this is shameful conduct. And they're not just doing it, I mean, of course, they're doing it with purpose, right? It's not just that they're having sex, but it's all in honor of this god Apis, this Apis bull. Okay, obviously a bull is a sign of fertility, right? So that's going to be one of the things that they're doing. And unfortunately for Israel is this prostitution, this adultery will never be removed from their society. They're going to always have their false gods, and the false gods, more often than not, almost always I should say, are all about fertility. Okay, so when you hear about a fertility god, that just means sex. Okay, that's all it is. And when they had the Asherah pole, okay, the Ashtoreth, right? The Ashtoreth or the Asherah, that's a phallus. That's what that is. Okay, it's a phallus. And they had those all over. God says they were under every tree and on every high hill is where they had these things.
High places.
Yeah, all the high places is they had sexual innuendos, sexual symbols all over the place. Okay, now fast forward to modern day. Oh, we don't have any of that stuff.
Uh-huh.
It's all over the place. Okay, we have the phallus symbol everywhere, and in some places that might be a little bit shocking to you. Okay, now we obviously know that oh goodness, help me out.
Washington Monument.
Yes, but what is that? That's an obelisk. Okay, the Egyptian,
Obelisk.
the obelisk from Egypt.
Yep.
Okay, so when you think about this, right? Egypt was a nation that was full of obelisks,
Mm-hmm.
and an obelisk is a phallus symbol, so it's a nation that's full of phallus symbols. Okay.
The dome of the Capitol building is the
And the
Dome of
woman.
Yes, the
Isis.
dome of the Capitol building in Washington D.C. is to represent the womb of Isis. Okay, so it all goes back to Egypt. It's crazy, but this whole idea. In fact, there was a god in ancient Egypt called the god Min, M-I-N-N, and he was a god of sexuality. Okay, and he had a erect phallus. Okay, and that his symbol was what was converted into an obelisk. Okay, so if you begin to trace that obelisk, and I read about this in the book Pagan Christianity, that the obelisk was then converted into the bell tower, and then from the bell tower it was converted into the steeple. Remember, here's the church, here's the steeple, look
Open the
inside, and
doors,
all the
see
people,
all the
right? So, of course, it's very innocent. Nobody today is thinking about that stuff. But where it originates from is from that sexual symbol. Okay, and that's the unfortunate reality. We can say, "Oh, that's not true," but it is true. Right? Go back and research it yourself. If you don't believe me, that's fine. But I want you to see that it goes all the way back to the very beginning of Israel's nationhood, and that goes way back into Egypt. Okay, it goes all the way back into Egypt, and unfortunately, this impulse is never going to be taken away, and eventually, it's going to destroy the nation, both the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. They're both going to fall into this, and they are worshiping Baal. They're worshiping Ashtoreth, and remember, when you have these fertility rites, little babies come, right? And when you have little babies that nobody wants, what do you do with them? You sacrifice them to the god Molech.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Oh, how handy. So that is what was happening back then. And you can begin to see why God is offended by this. It's not just that, well, they like some other god. It's just not fair. No, what they're doing is they're destroying themselves. They're absolutely destroying themselves. So, anyway, he now tells them it's time to take your stand. Who are you gonna stand for? Are you gonna believe and worship God, or are you going to worship this false god? So the Levites gathered themselves together to him, and he said to them, thus says Yehovah, God of Israel, let every man put his sword on his side and go in and out from entrance to entrance throughout the camp, and let every man kill his brother, every man his companion, and every man his neighbor. Okay, so it's very, okay, they're having an orgy. Okay, they're in their tents doing their thing, and now he's saying, take your swords, okay, and go into the tents just like Phinehas did. All right, just like Phinehas, and finish them off. Okay, that is what is going to happen. So, it seems like, oh, God is just so mean. But you know what? You've got to purge the sin. You've got to purge the lawlessness. Remember, the word sin is just shorthand for lawlessness. We read that so clearly in 1 John chapter 3, verse 4, that sin is lawlessness. Sin is lawlessness. If you understand that, so when you come to the word sin, you're just thinking lawlessness. You've got to purge the lawlessness from your society. And I hear it from so many Christians that makes me cry. They're like, well, is it right that, should we stone the adulterer and all this different stuff, as if God would give bad, inhumane laws. But let's take it to the flip side, okay? And really, our society, our world is evidence of what happens when we don't follow the law, when we don't follow the Torah. We can say, well, it's so much better. I'd hate to live in a society where they did that. I wouldn't. I'd rather live in a society where they did that. I'd rather live in a society where, yes, they stone the adulterer. I'm sorry. It's unfortunate, but it's going to be better for the society in the long run, okay? Because look what happens to our society. Look what has happened, right? We have, of course, basic things like teen pregnancy, okay? We've got children born out of wedlock. We've got, of course, abortion. Don't forget about that one, okay? And much of abortion deals with adultery, okay? It's because, and I'm not blaming it on the women. I'm blaming it on the women. It takes two, right? But, she gets stuck with the goods. And so now this practice has just become an easy method to deal with it. It's become an easy method to deal with adultery and fornication. Okay? But if you put that away, right? I mean, how many abortions would we be having if we actually stoned the adulterer? Like 0? Okay? I mean, think about it. You can say, oh, that's just awful and barbaric. But what about the little baby that never had a chance? Okay, and of course the list goes on and on and on. And let's just take very practical adultery where a man cheats on his wife. Think about the heartbreak of the wife. Think about the disappointment of the children, and how that can turn into anger. It can turn into depression. It can turn into suicide. It can turn into violence or rape. Right. So the ramifications of just that one sin go on and on and on. Go 3 or 4 generations, then it turns into Hollywood, and then it's on the screen, and then we export it. Okay, I mean, just think about that. This is what happens when we don't follow the Torah. Okay, so yes, the perpetrator of these things, the lawbreaker, will suffer the consequence. Okay, I have no idea what that means for their eternal destiny. I'm not saying they're going to heaven or hell. I have no idea. But from a societal point of view, it's much, much better, and it's going to save lives, right? Aren't we all about saving lives? This is going to save lives. This is going to help people if we do it. And then we don't need all the marriage counselors. We don't need all the teen pregnancy counselors. We don't need all these hotlines and all these things that we do, spending our energy trying to help people. But what we're not willing to do is look at the cause. We're always trying to deal with the effect and not the cause. All right, we're like, oh, the effects are so bad. We've got to help people.
The fruit, not the
right?
root.
We're trying to do something about the fruit, but you can't do anything about the fruit. The fruit's going to happen. You have to go back and deal with the roots. That is where the problem is. Until you cut out the root, you will always necessarily get the fruit no matter what you do. And we're all looking at the fruit. We're like, this fruit's no good. Let's try to help the fruit. You can't. It's too late for the fruit. It came. It matured. That's it. In order to get rid of that ugly fruit, we have to go back to the root and cut it out. That is what we have to do. And it goes back to this notion that Torah is a bad thing. And I'm debating people all day long sometimes, not lately, but on whether the Torah is good or bad. And people have taken the words of Paul and they've twisted them to make it look like Paul is saying that the Torah is a bad thing, or that the Torah is a curse, or the Torah was nailed to the cross. And this could not be anything further from the truth. That's not what happened. The consequence, the fruit, as it were, was nailed to the cross. But the root being the Torah, the good root, that wasn't uprooted and taken away. Are you kidding? That's ridiculous. But when you break the Torah, the fruit that came from that was dealt with at the cross. Thank you, Jesus. Okay? But he's not going to get rid of the good tree. The good tree is what you want to eat. But when you break it, when you disobey, then you'll get this nasty, rotten fruit. And you eat it and it makes you sick. And that's what he came to deal with, is that sickness, because we're eating bad fruit. That's it. And I tell you, I think the church is so confused. I was confused. I don't have all the answers yet. But on this point, I believe God has shown me the light, because the Torah is good. And if we'll keep it, even those things were like, well, what about stoning the adulterer? If you think it through, it begins to make sense. Now you say, well, do you go and stone the adulterer? Should we just, go pick up stones? Well, of course not. Why? Well, why not? Well, think about it. Any judge who sits in his courtroom does not have the authority or the jurisdiction to go outside of that courtroom and see somebody on the street who maybe broke a law and just, take out a gun and shoot him. Say, well, I would have given you the death sentence anyway. No. There's due process. There's always due process, okay? So we have to give due process a chance, all right? And God gave due process in his Torah, right? He gave due process. Now, in the case of the people that are being killed here, this is due process, okay? First of all, God, the judge, is right there, okay? He's dwelling among them. He's already given them the law, and they said, yes, we'll do it. They agreed to it. They sealed it with blood, right? And he told what would happen if you break the law, right? Just, days before, a couple weeks before, he said, this is what's going to happen if you break it, right? So he already told them the consequence of breaking that. So they knew full well, and they signed their life to it. So they have no excuse. So God is not being harsh at all. He's not being harsh. He's just sticking to the deal. In fact, they're lucky he didn't, smoke the whole bunch of them, right? That's just a bunch of grace right there, right? So we have to reform the way we see the Torah. In my opinion, it's absolute idolatry, and it's blasphemous to call the Torah a curse. And yet that is what I hear from Christians all over the place. And they're just so happy. They're doing the dance. Thank you, Jesus, that you saved us from the Torah, from the law. And I'm like, that's not what he said. That is not what he said. In fact, I was enjoying some time with a former student of mine, and we kind of got on the topic of the Torah. And we came to Matthew chapter 5, verse 19, where Jesus said, if anyone breaks the least of these commandments and teaches men to do so, he will be the least in the kingdom. And he said to me, not everything that Jesus said applies to us. And my jaw hit the ground. I'm like, because I didn't teach him that. Okay, I'm like, whoa. I'm like, ooh. I'm like, well, if what Jesus said doesn't apply to me, then what does?
Exactly.
And who does it apply to?
Call yourself a Christian.
Who's to decide?
And who's to decide suddenly? If what Jesus said does not apply to me.
Says who?
Yeah, exactly. Says who? By whose authority can you say that? I mean, he clearly says that if you break the commandments, he's talking about the 10 commandments and the Torah, that all that God said. If you break the least of these and you teach men to break them, you will be the least in the kingdom. And yet, he is not alone. I want you to know that. This former student of mine is very mainstream. He's very mainstream. Okay, I have another colleague that I used to work with, and I emailed him some questions. I tried to be very polite about it. I was not, he wrote me a response. I didn't write him back to say you're wrong or something like that. But I just I'm saying, look, I'm a little bit concerned that you might be the least in the kingdom because you're teaching men to break the least of these. You yourself are breaking them, and you're teaching men to break the least of these things. Okay? And he said, oh, no, that was all changed, and you don't understand grace. And then I asked another spiritual leader that I know, okay, who I don't want to incriminate anybody, okay, but another spiritual leader that I know, and we got on this topic, and we were talking about this, and he's like, oh no, all that was done away with. It was dealt with at the cross, and I don't have to keep the law because Jesus did it for me. And I'm like, really? And that's not what Jesus said, and that's not what Paul said. But that is the mentality of 99.9% of the Christian world today. Okay.
Is that just the U.S.
Well, it could just be in the U.S. I don't know. I haven't done a.
Like that in Europe.
Well, okay. At least
Unless they've been contaminated.
We'll say an American Christianity because that's what I know the best. Okay. I have not done a complete survey of everybody in the whole world. So, 99.9% of the Christian circles that I hang out in. Okay. So maybe there's some exception. So. Look, God is gracious. If you don't believe that, go back, read the book of Exodus, read it slowly, and see the grace. And if that isn't good enough for you, we're going to get to chapter 34, and God's to just come right out and say it. Okay? In fact, let's just take a little preview, because I can't. I'm just dying to show you. I just can't wait. I'm just busting at the seams to show you how gracious God is. How gracious this God of ours is. All right. So Moses is saying, look, God, you say we're friends and all, but I'd love to see your face. He's like, I'm sorry, you can't do that, but go hang out in that rock and I'll put my hand over you and I'll pass by. And verse 5, it says, now Yehovah descended there in the cloud and stood with him there and proclaimed the name of Yehovah. And Yehovah passed before him and proclaimed, Yehovah, Yehovah, God, merciful and gracious, long-suffering, and abounding in goodness and truth, keeping mercy for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, by no means clearing the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the third and the fourth, upon the children and the children's children to the third and fourth generation. All right, so what does God say about himself? Yehovah, Yehovah, merciful and gracious, long-suffering and abounding in goodness and truth. And that little phrase we're going to find woven throughout Scripture again and again. That is the very reason that Jonah did not want to go to Nineveh. He said, because I knew that you're a God who is merciful and gracious, long-suffering and abundance in goodness and truth. That's exactly what he says. He says, that's why I didn't want to go. Because that's what I know you. I know that's how you are. God is so gracious. He has always been gracious. The word grace is in the Hebrew Bible. It did not begin with Jesus. It did not begin at Calvary. It did not begin with Paul. It did not begin with the New Testament, you guys. It's all the way back to Adam.
Yeah.
This is God's character. This is who he is. Okay, I mean, here God is proclaiming. He's making this bold statement of who he is. He could have said, Yehovah, Yehovah, wrathful and mean and vindictive and judgmental, at least until the cross. No, he declares who he is. And again, I get into these discussions with Christians and say, well, that was the age of law. But now we're in the age of grace. And I'm like, what are you talking about? It's always been grace. Grace is not new. Grace is not new. It's not new. And yet that is the lie that we've been told, that grace is new. Grace is not new. God has always been gracious, all right? Yeah, praise God for that. I mean, just imagine if he were not that kind of God. Right? There'd be nobody on the planet. I mean, right? It'd be a big barren rock because God's like, zap, 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 zap. Just get rid of all of you, like Pac-Man, right? And he just eats up the whole planet because they're all good for nothings, right? Except maybe there might be 3 guys left. There's Noah, there's Job, and there's Daniel. You guys made it. But the rest of y'all, you're done.
Yeah, Elijah, you're all right.
Yeah, well, Elijah and Enoch, yeah, you guys are okay. And Moses, all right. Yeah. And, so this is who God is. He's gracious and merciful, long-suffering, and abounding in goodness and truth. He's so awesome. Okay, so this is we have to understand who God is, and my goodness, he's restraining himself yet again. All right, he does it yet again. So verse 28, so the sons of Levi did according to the word of Moses, and about 3,000 men fell that day. Now 3,000, what an interesting number. Okay, now when is this again? This is Shavuot, right? This is Shavuot, okay? So what happens on another Shavuot, about 1,476 years later, approximately,
Jerusalem.
right? In Jerusalem, the Holy Spirit falls on the men, and 3,000 come in, okay? So the 3,000 that were lost here are picked up, a couple thousand years later. I mean, it's amazing, okay? This is why it's important to understand the feasts. Without understanding those feasts, it's all just kind of a big blur. And you think that this whole brand new thing started at Pentecost. I hear that all the time too. Well, the church started at Pentecost. Like, well, wait a second, guys. I mean, what is the new covenant? I ask people, what is the old covenant? And they're like, and they're not sure what to say because they haven't thought it through. If you don't know what the old covenant is, then what is the new covenant? It's not going to make any sense to you, right? It's just not going to make any sense. You have to understand the original first in order to get the second. The original was a marriage covenant between God and this nation. The renewed covenant, because in Hebrew, chadash can mean new or to renew, okay? How do I know that? How can I prove that? Maybe you don't believe me. All right. Never mind. I did go to the Hebrew University, but that's okay. You don't have to believe people just because they have a degree, and you shouldn't. Okay. But let me prove it to you from the Hebrew itself. Every month there's a new moon. Okay. And that new moon or month is called a chodesh. Chodesh. Okay. A chodesh comes from the word chadash, which means new. Now, what do you think? The moon that we see this month, the new moon, is it the same moon that we had last month? Well, of course it is. It's not like a brand new, completely different ball of dirt up there. It's the same ball of dirt that's up there in the sky. It's called the moon. It's the same one. But now it's a new moon, not because it's a different moon. It's the same moon, but it's renewed. Okay? And so that is right there in the word. So the word chadash doesn't mean that it has to be something of a completely different origin. It can be something of the same origin, but there's some new quality about it. Right? And that's
so Jeremiah 31:31, that's where we see the Hadash.
Jeremiah 31:31, that's the Brit HaDasha. Right? I'm going to make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Okay? And he's going to put his Torah behind you. He's going to put his Torah in their hearts. He's going to put his Torah in their hearts. And again, if the Torah is now going to be in the heart, then how should you be living? According to the Torah. Right? If he's putting the Torah in your heart, and yeah, I've had endless debates about this one. Oh no, that's not the same Torah. I'm like, well, what Torah is it? I mean, if it's not the Torah that God gave, he said, well, that's impossible because that was nailed to the cross. I'm like, no, it wasn't.
Jesus was
You
nailed
see?
to the cross.
You know, I mean, this is all the confusion that we're having about this, and I don't blame it on the average person, because I was clueless too. It's the system that we were born into. It started back with a guy named Marcion, who came up with this idea that there were two gods. There was the God of the Old Testament, God of the New Testament. The God of the Old Testament was a meanie, judgmental kind of guy, and the God of the New Testament, lovey-dovey, all that stuff, right? And it's called Marcionism, and he rejected basically everybody, certainly the Old Testament. In fact, I believe he was the one that coined the phrase. He was the one that divided the two spheres of it, to the Old Testament and the New Testament. Okay, and then he rejected everybody except Paul. He said pretty much only Paul is okay. Only Paul is kosher, as it were. All right, and so he got rid of the Gospels. He got rid of everything except Paul, right? And I'm like, well, that's kind of interesting, because when I go into a lot of churches nowadays, who are they talking from most of the time? Who are they preaching from? Paul. It's almost always Paul, right? Paul. I love Paul. I think Paul is a genius, okay? But he wrote 5% of the Bible. There's 95% of it in there as well. But what happens is they take that 95% and they cram it through this filter of the 5% of Paul, and they're saying, well, I have to filter it through Paul, which is incorrect. You should take 95 and the 5, put them together, and you're going to get a good composite all together. You don't filter it through Paul. But I find that people want to filter the Torah through the book of Galatians. All right? They're like, because Galatians is kind of like, that's like their silver bullet. Well, Paul said right here, okay, in the book of Galatians. I'm like, well, Jesus said over here. Like, who's Jesus? Like, is he your king or not? Well, yeah, but Paul had the Holy Spirit, so Paul is just as good as Jesus. I'm like, well, okay, but Jesus, Jesus is the one who said things. Paul's commenting on Jesus, not the other way around. Okay, so out of the two, I'm gonna go with Jesus.
Yeah.
Okay, if I think Paul is confused or saying something different than Jesus, I'll go with Jesus. Okay, and I'll let Paul be understood in light of what Jesus said. I'll let Paul be understood in light of what the Torah says. But most of Christianity that I know of wants to let the Torah be understood in light of what Paul said. And that is wrong. Okay, that is just plain wrong. There's no other way to say it. It's just wrong. Okay, so we need to, yes, read Paul, appreciate Paul, but Paul should be understood in light of what God said, not the other way around. Okay, I'm not against Paul. Don't accuse me of that, please. I like Paul. I think Paul is a genius. But even Peter said that the writings of Paul are hard to understand. And people that are untrained twist them as they do the rest of the scriptures. Okay, when he was talking about scriptures, he was not talking about the New Testament. He was talking about the Hebrew Bible, which was the scriptures.
Which was the oldest scripture.
That was the scripture. That's what they had. Right? There was no New Testament. So when he talked about the scriptures, he's talking about the Torah, the Nevi'im, the Ketuvim. That's what it was. Okay? And so we've got to recalibrate our theology because it's really out of whack. Okay? It's seriously out of whack. And I just think it's causing a lot of damage. I think it's causing a lot of grief. It certainly isn't good when you're trying to witness to a Jewish person, Hey, Jesus died for your sins, so now you can eat bacon. And they're like, huh? Jesus died, so you don't have to keep the Sabbath anymore. They're like, but why? I like Sabbath. Well, it's too bad.
Work that day, darn it.
You're supposed to work, okay?
The Lord is Sunday.
Right. They're like, and so then they go away scratching their head saying, like, those Christians are like, they're kind of worshiping like this pagan idea, of getting rid of the law. Right? And furthermore, who did Paul even tell us what was the name that Paul gave to the Antichrist? The man of lawlessness, the lawless one. Okay, the lawless one. What did Jesus say? He's going to change the times and the seasons according to Daniel. Jesus said that because of lawlessness, the love of many will grow cold. Right? And I think that's what's happened. I think that we have grown cold as a society because our love for the law, our obedience to it, has fallen so far. And the church is just as bad because we're saying, oh, it's okay. All right, so now we have these topics of gay marriage, okay? And we don't have a leg to stand on now from the Bible because they say, well, homosexuality is an abomination. And they'll answer, well, so is eating pig. And like, oh, well, the law has changed. The law was nailed to the cross. They're like, well, okay, if it was nailed to the cross for pig, that's an abomination. Wasn't it also nailed to the cross for homosexuality? That's an abomination. You see, this is we've painted ourselves into this proverbial corner, and there's no way to get out. Because you said the law was nailed to the cross, we can eat pig now. And yet we say, well, so then homosexuality is okay, because they're both called an abomination. So who's to say which one's okay, which one's not okay, right? So that is the problem. And yet to even have this conversation with somebody, it's difficult. I'll just say that, okay? It's very difficult because people are just kind of got their hands in their ears and la, 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 I'm not listening to you. And we need to always be willing to go back to re-examine our theology and say, maybe we don't have it right. Maybe there's something that I'm stuck in and I'm believing is true, but is actually just a tradition of men, right? We Christians, modern church, have lots of traditions of men, just like the Pharisees. Oh my goodness, do we ever have them? But we love to point out the Pharisees. Oh, those Pharisees, they were changing God's word. Well, yeah, but we do the same thing. We're just as much a Pharisee as they ever were. And we're a lot worse. We're a lot worse. So be careful before you pass the judgment. Okay. All right. So then, verse 29, then Moses said, consecrate yourselves today to the Lord, that he may bestow on you a blessing this day, for every man has opposed his son and his brother. Now it came to pass on the next day that Moses said to the people, you have committed a great sin. Now I will go up to Jehovah, perhaps I can make atonement for your sin. Now isn't that interesting? Okay. So here's Moses, this beautiful picture of the intercessor, of the Redeemer, right? The one who's going to make atonement. So now how can Moses make atonement? How can he make atonement for their sin? Did he die? No. Did he offer a sacrifice up there? No. So what is this atonement? Remember, atonement just means a covering. A covering, right? And so what does he say? Then Moses returned to Jehovah and said, oh, these people have committed a great sin and have made for themselves a god of gold. Yet now, if you will forgive their sin, but if not, I pray, blot me out of your book, which you have written. And Jehovah said to Moses, whoever has sinned against me, I will blot him out of my book. Now therefore go, lead the people to the place of which I have spoken to you. Behold, my angel shall go before you. Nevertheless, in the day when I visit for punishment, I will visit punishment upon them for their sin or for their lawlessness. So Jehovah plagued the people because of what they did with the calf which Aaron made. So when Moses goes to intercede for the people and to atone for them, it's not about a sacrifice. Right? There's no blood that's spilled here. He simply goes and he asks for their sin to be forgiven. Right? So that is how it's always been. It has always been about asking God for forgiveness. It's that simple, really. Okay, now, yes, there is a penalty, all right? And God just kind of held the penalty back for a while, okay? Because we know there's a penalty. We understand that. I get that, all right? But in order for me to be made right with God, I simply need to ask him to forgive me. And that's it, okay? He then decided how he would kind of keep all those demerits, All right, he's like, okay, I forgive you, but there's a penalty. All right, so it's kind of like when I hear a big crash and I look over and I say, what happened? And the kids just broke another plate. Okay, and they're like, I'm sorry, and I say, I forgive you. Okay, it's that simple. Really, it is. Okay, but guess what? The plate is still broken. Who bears the price or the cost of that broken plate? I do. Okay, because I bought it in the first place, and now that it's gone, I'm the one that has to replace it. Okay, I'm the Abba. Okay, I'm not expecting them to go and buy a new plate. I guess I could, but even so, their allowance comes out of my money, right? So I'm the one that has to replace the plate. Even though I've said, you know what, forget about it, don't worry about it, I forgive you.
I got it covered.
I got it covered. Okay? But eventually, I have to go and buy a whole new set. In fact, I need to do that really soon because I'm almost about out of plates, okay? So even though I've forgiven them, there's a cost. I've got to go back to the store, buy a new set, because it's off their account, but now it's on my account. Okay, so God's like, okay, I forgive you, I forgive you, I forgive you, but all the while he's still collecting the broken plates. Okay, and eventually he's like, you know what, I got to do something. We're out of plates. Okay, we've got to do something. And eventually God's like, okay, I've incurred all these debts, all these wrongdoings. I've taken it. Or think about a relationship. Okay. This is much more to the point that you're in a marriage relationship and your spouse hurts you deeply. Okay, you have the option to say I forgive you or I don't. Okay, if you don't, well, then you're going to have that anger and bitterness between you. If you say, okay, I forgive you, it really is that simple. I forgive you. I release you from this debt. But guess what? As the victim of that, as the one who was offended, you now have to absorb the cost of that. Okay, so whatever was done against you, okay, and let's not kid ourselves. There are things that we can do to each other that can be very, very painful. And quite often you don't want to forgive. Okay, so as the one who's been victimized in some way, and it's in order to say that I forgive you, you have to now absorb that wrongdoing. Okay, so that's happening to God. Is we keep offending him and breaking his good instructions, and we go say, I'm so sorry, and he's like, you know what? It's okay. I'll find a way to forgive you. You're forgiven, but I'm still incurring this cost, and at one point I'm gonna have to deal with it. Okay, and so fast forward to the cross. Now, all of that junk, all of the cup gets poured out on Jesus. God's like, oh, here you go. I've been collecting this stuff since like day one. Okay, I've been collecting all this garbage because every time somebody's broken my Torah, broken my good instructions, I just kind of, threw a penny in there. All right, and now here it is. It's totally full. Right. So now, in order to be rid of this debt, this imbalance in the universe, I've got to pour it out somehow, and we've got to balance the books. Okay, how are we going to balance the books? Who's going to pay for this? Right? Who's going to pay for this? Right? You have a fender bender with somebody. He dents your car. Okay, and you say, no, I forgive you. Don't worry about it. Let's say you don't have insurance, for example. Okay, it makes it a little easier. If you don't have insurance, don't worry about it. All right. You forgave him. Thank you. Well, really? Yeah, it's okay. I forgive you completely for denting my car. Wow, thank you, But now you have to deal with it because when you go to resell it, either you have to fix it or you incur the cost of a lower resale value. So you are absorbing that cost. That's exactly what God did. He absorbed the cost. Okay? And he took it just upon himself right here. I said, okay, I forgive them. But eventually, all of that cost was then dumped onto Jesus. Okay, so that's what eventually happened. But as far as getting right with God, it's not the blood sacrifice that would make you right. That was simply the absorption. Okay, at least in the case of Jesus. It's slightly different for all the animal sacrifices, but I don't want to get on that tangent. So here we have God saying, okay, this is okay. Moses goes up and he asks for their forgiveness. This is a really good redeemer, okay? And it reminds me of Daniel, because Daniel in chapter 9, he's praying on behalf of his people who have seriously blown it, okay? But does Daniel say, oh, God, my people suck. My people are awful. And if they broke all these things and now I'm here, right? He's not having a pity party and saying it's not fair, but he's interceding on behalf of his people. And he's saying, we have broken your laws. To us is shame of face, okay? Because we broke your laws. We didn't listen to your prophets. He's not saying they didn't listen. In my opinion, he could have, right? He was just a young lad, and, he didn't really do anything wrong. He was not even accountable at that point when he was taken away, and castrated and made a eunuch in the court of Nebuchadnezzar. He didn't do anything wrong. And now he's facing the consequence, right? But he includes himself in that. Such a beautiful picture. So Moses, these people, they've committed a great sin. Clearly Moses didn't do it. But that's also makes Moses a beautiful picture of Yeshua, because Moses here had done no wrong in this case. Okay, later but he says, blot me out of your book. Now this raises an interesting question. What is this book that we're talking about? Okay, what is this book that we're talking about? Well, we see it in Revelation 3:5. Jesus says, he who overcomes shall be clothed in white garments, and I will not blot out his name from the book of life, but I will confess his name before my Father and before his angels. All right, so there's something about that. And then we have in Revelation 21:27, but there shall by no means enter anything that defiles or causes abomination or a lie, but only those who are written in the Lamb's book of life. All right, and then of course in the next chapter, chapter 22, we have, not chapter 22, but chapter 20, going the wrong direction. So in chapter 20, Revelation chapter 20, all right, sometimes my computer's too fast. I can't even keep up here. So it says in verse 11, then I saw a great white throne and him who sat on it, from whose face the earth and heaven fled away, and there was found no place for them. And I saw the dead, small and great, standing before God, and books were opened. Another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged according to their works by the things that were written in the books. And the next one says, and another book was opened, which is the book of life, and the dead were judged according to their works. Okay, so we see if they're not in the book of life, then they are cast out. Okay, verse 15, anyone not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. So what we see from Revelation chapter 3 very, very, very clearly, and what Moses says, is that he says, blot me out of your book. Okay, and Jesus says there in Revelation chapter 3 that your name can be removed from the book of life. Okay, so so I don't think it's an implication. I think it's just a factual statement.
And Moses,
that what Moses here is saying, he's like, just blot me out of your book. So it sounds like you start in the book. You don't later get there. That is where you start. And then you can have your name removed. Again, Revelation 3:5, he who overcomes shall be clothed in white garments, and I will not blot out his name from the book of life.
so every human's got their name in the book.
So the book, your name is in the book. And you want to stay there, okay? And then at the judgment, if your name isn't there, that means that it has been removed. Your name has been removed for some reason.
So forget once saved, always saved.
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole can of worms, right? The once saved, always saved. You know, I do believe that my salvation is secure. I do believe that Jesus did everything necessary.
Well, those who didn't continue it,
Right, but we have to
were never
continue.
of us.
We have, I know, there's all kinds of arguments, so I don't want to get into it, but all I'm saying is your name is in there, but it can be removed. Okay? So it's your name starts in the book of life, and then at some point it can be removed.
And we have it in the Old
Okay.
Testament. And
We have the Old Testament
Therefore,
and the New
fear the
Testament.
and
Lord.
Revelation.
Fear the Lord.
Honor.
That is the wise thing to do, right? That is the wise thing to
It's
do.
the beginning of wisdom. Just the
But
beginning.
notice how fervent Moses is, right? He is so desirous. And, you know, I have to think of the Apostle Paul here in the book of Romans chapter 9, that, you know, he is so, you know, he's so much sorrow and grief in his heart. He says, I could wish that I myself were accursed from Christ for my brethren, my countrymen, according to the flesh. So Paul has that same fervent desire for his people, as does Moses. You know, Moses is like, take me out of your book. I mean, why? You know, I don't think I would do that, to be honest. I mean, way to go, Moses, right? You certainly get accolades in my book, but I don't know if I'd have the courage, because I'm like, well, maybe God's gonna do it, you know.
Yeah.
Like, you know, maybe he'll see through my little facade and say, oh, okay, I'll just do it. I'm like, no, don't do it, right? But he's willing to lay down his life and even his soul, whatever he quite understood about that. But, you know, take me out of your book. And, you know, God's like, okay, whoever has sinned. All right. Oh, here's interesting. Whoever has sinned. What does sin mean? Okay,
Lawlessness.
you don't have to believe me. Go with me to John, 1 John chapter 3, verse 4. Okay. And you know that he was manifested to take away our sins. Sorry, I got the wrong verse. Whoever commits sin also commits lawlessness, and sin is lawlessness. Okay. So that is the most succinct definition of sin in the Bible. Okay. By the apostle whom Jesus loved. Whoever commits sin also commits lawlessness, and sin is lawlessness. Okay, so think about that. Lawlessness. Okay, anomia in the Greek. Anomia, without law. And what does Jesus say in Matthew chapter 7 to those who say, you know, Lord, Lord? He says, you know, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. Then I will say to those, depart from me, you workers of iniquity, or you workers of lawlessness. Anomia. That's the word that's used there. Anomia. Okay? And that lawless or sin is not a good thing. So why people are so eager to shake off the Torah, I don't know. It's kind of a mystery. And in my opinion, the great apostasy, the falling away, is not something to do with the rapture. It's not to do with, you know, the various TV evangelists. I mean, yeah, they're pretty far gone, right?
They're pretty lawless themselves.
But let's reel that in a little bit more. Whoever is lawless, whoever is against Torah, just, you know, I don't want to connect all the dots here, but it's not a good place to be. Because if you're against Torah, then you're in favor of the lawless one. And Jesus says, depart from me, you who are lawless, you lawless ones. So many passages speak about that. And I just see this, I'm burdened, really. I'm really burdened by what I see in Scripture, and I hear from people that, you know, that the law was nailed to the cross. Okay? There's a guy that decided to have a dream about me and another friend of mine, and in this dream he discovered that we're false teachers and all this different stuff, and it's because, you know, we're advocating that we just might want to keep the Torah. And I'm like,
What?
really? Like, okay, I mean, if that's your problem, then fine, you know. But, you know, he had this dream and people were listening to him, and now, they're convinced, and I'm like, look at Scripture, and what does Scripture say? And then he posted a thing, a little meme on Facebook where it has the law and it's nailed to the cross. Okay, that's what it says. The cross, and then the law is nailed to it. It says LAW, it's nailed to the cross.
Actually, the curse
But I know it's the curse, but that's not what people think. They think it's the law of Moses or the Torah was nailed to the cross.
Curse to see you.
So I know. You don't need to convince me. But that is what people are teaching. That is what they're believing, and to speak against that makes you kind of an enemy. Okay, so think about this, guys. I mean, the law is easy. God said it's not too hard for you. It's not too mysterious for you. It's not up in heaven. It's not across the sea. It's right in your heart. It's in your mouth. You can do it. Okay, and the idea that Jesus did the law so I don't have to is preposterous. That's absolute heresy. It's blasphemy. Okay, to suggest that. We know that if Jesus did it, then I can too. It's kind of like I forget who it is, but the man that did the 4-minute mile. Okay, I actually blogged about this. Okay, but Davis, I think it was. He did the 4-minute mile. Nobody had ever done the 4-minute mile before. But guess what? After he did it, a whole bunch of people started doing it because they're like, "Oh my goodness, we can actually do this." Right? So Jesus attained it. He was able to keep it. Guess what? You can too. Right? You may not get it the first time around, but keep at it. That's our goal, is to keep it.
Because his seed remains in us.
Yeah, we want to go on not sinning, not breaking the law. If we break it, okay, we have an advocate. He'll stand up and say, okay, just like Moses did. He'll stand up and say, please forgive this guy. Okay.
Followers of
right?
the way.
Even though these people were not repentant, they didn't deserve it, etc. But he interceded. Okay. Now notice also the people that did sin and remained in that, they were killed. Okay, so they were put away. So we have to reform the way we think about the Torah and about God.
Just read it.
Just read it, and you'll see it for yourself. Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to have to stop there, despite all the fun that we're having. But all good things must come to an end, I suppose. So let me leave you with this. Yevarecha Adonai v'yishmerecha, Ya'eh Adonai panav elecha v'yichunecha, Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord Yehovah lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Till next week, God bless everyone.
Amen.